Thank you so much for being here this morning. I am Dr. Brian Caputo, the president of College of DuPage, and welcome to the college, our campus. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the critical need to focus on mental health. Earlier this year, the World Health Organization issued a brief that revealed that the global prevalence of anxiety and depression increased by 25% during the first year of the pandemic. The two populations affected most were women and young people. According to the brief, young people are disproportionately at risk of suicidal and self-harming behaviors because of the pandemic. This came at a time when social services were interrupted or reduced, leaving some young people unable to receive the help that they needed. In addition, substance abuse among our youth continues to be a national crisis. Locally, depression rates among DuPage County students were far greater than the national average before COVID-19. All of this reflects a cry for help, and we need to respond to it. As the world reopens, even as the pandemic continues, we must continue to monitor how our young people respond. Can they cope? And how can we be ready to provide them with the proper help and care when they need it? At College of DuPage, our goal is student success. And this goes beyond academics. It means meeting our students where they're at, addressing the barriers that keep them from succeeding, and making sure that they are prepared, both academically and personally, for their futures. Today's event is essential to ensuring the health of DuPage County teens. I am thankful that the DuPage County Prevention Leadership Team is working on behalf of this population, and I am grateful for the many resources that exist in DuPage County that tirelessly ensure the well-being of our youth. Because of the efforts of the PLT, significant progress is being made toward reducing substance abuse rates and addressing mental health concerns. By working together, we can find ways to keep our young people healthy and prepare them for their futures with endless possibilities. Thank you for being here today. I'm not sure who's next.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Caputo. Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you all in person. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. My name is Jennifer Hess. I work at DuPage County Juvenile Probation, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the PLT, along with Andrew Anselm, also here from the Illinois State Police. So the Prevention Leadership Team, what are we? We are a county-wide community coalition working to address substance use prevention and mental wellness among DuPage County youth ages 18 and under. So on the screen you can see our main focuses, which really are prevention policies and providing education and information. So if you're looking for support, if you're looking for education and information, I'll give you some contact information at the end. Please always reach out to us if we can be of service and of assistance. We would love to do that for you. So we have all been through a lot in the past couple of years. And we know our kids are resilient, right? But we also really probably don't fully understand the impact that COVID-19 and everything that's come along with it have had on our kids. So we are really hopeful that today's events will continue to bring attention to the topics of youth substance use prevention and mental wellness. And we really hope that today is a call to action for our policymakers, our community leaders, and anyone in DuPage County to really make sure that we're putting the health and well-being of our kids first. So before I introduce our keynote speaker and panelists, I'd like to briefly share some data about substance use and mental wellness trends among DuPage County youth, just to kind of set the stage for today's presentation. So I want to talk just a little bit about the Illinois Youth Survey. We'll refer to it today as the IYS. A lot of PLT's work is driven by data generated by the IYS, which is a self-report adolescent survey. It's administered by the Illinois Department of Human Services, and we ask 8th, 10th, and 12th graders in DuPage County to self-report on a number of topics like substance use, mental health, school culture, etc. This information is available in aggregate data form. It's publicly available, but schools will also be getting information about students at their school for schools who elect to participate. The survey is free. The only thing that's asked of schools is to find one period during the school year to administer the survey. So we get a lot of really rich local data from the IYS, and that's really what we'll be talking about today from PLT's perspective. So we have data through 2020. Data from 2022 should be available by August. So as you can see, the top 3 substances that youth in DuPage County are reporting using are alcohol, marijuana, e-cigarettes, and tobacco. Okay, so this slide is a nice comparison of 2014 and 2020 data for substances reported as most frequently used by youth in DuPage County. I'm really happy to see that prescription drug use is really quite low and wasn't in our top 3. This is for, according to the IYS, all grade levels have been self-reporting lower substance use rates between 2014 and 2020. So the good news is substance use self-report by youth in our county is going down. So compound that with what the National Institute of Mental Health tells us, and it's this idea that there's a correlation between mental health needs and substance use and mental health needs, that those two often don't exist in a silo, that there's a lot of interaction for a lot of people experiencing both substance use and mental health needs. So let's look just a little bit about why PLT is also wanting to talk about mental wellness. And so this slide really talks about depression. Youth are reporting on the IYS that they're experiencing the past 12 months. And the question is posed in such a way that it's in the past year, for a period of 2 or more weeks, have you experienced low mood, loss of interest in generally pleasurable activities? So it's not just had a bad day, but there is a period, a pattern of low mood and feeling down. And you'll see we had a lot of kids self-report in 2020, and a lot of them are telling us they're not feeling great. They're feeling low. They're feeling depressed. So let's look with how this compares to national data that's available to us. Depression rates, as Dr. Caputo referenced, they're really high in DuPage County. In fact, nearly 2 times greater compared to the national average, which you'll see here, 17% of youth nationally are reporting depressed mood for that period of 2 or more weeks. And in DuPage County, if you remember, our 10th graders are telling us 33% of them experienced depression during that same time period. So our kids are telling us they're having low mood frequently. So then moving on to this idea of considering attempting suicide. This is still a really high number. And what I'd like to point out is we only have data from the schools and the youth who choose to participate. And in 2020, we had a little more than 50% of schools self-reporting. So this is only a partial picture of what's going on in DuPage County. And these numbers are already really high. So again, I'm so thankful that all of you are here today so we can kind of keep talking about this and shining a light on what's going on locally. So then let's compare this again to national data. And again, in DuPage, unfortunately, our numbers are slightly higher. Nationally, 12% of students are reporting thoughts of committing suicide. And then if you recall, in DuPage County, 13 and 16%, so slightly higher. So in DuPage County, anywhere in the country, you have kids, adults, anybody has access to this crisis text line. So the PLT has been promoting this crisis text line since 2017. Anyone can use this by texting 741-741 and sending the word REACH. REACH is the key word for DuPage County. It helps us to generate data locally. But really, as long as you're reaching out 741-741, you're getting connected to a trained professional who is really going to work to de-escalate somebody from a hot moment to a cool moment. It's not in-depth counseling and therapy. It's really de-escalation so that youth or that individual can get through that moment. So we would encourage you to share this resource with anyone, everyone. There's information on our website if you'd like to learn a little bit more about this source. So what do we know about who's using the crisis text line locally? So for people who use the code word REACH, we're seeing that there are a number of conversations that happened in 2021. And what I'd like to call your attention to are the fact that there were 7 suicidal de-escalations in DuPage County. And there were 3 active rescues, meaning lives were actually saved because somebody was actively suicidal. They reached out in that moment, and there could be a response to keep that individual safe. If you look at the pie chart, you'll see what motivates somebody to reach out to the crisis text line. It's anxiety and stress. It's trouble at school, difficult relationships, and depression. So again, our kids are telling us we're struggling, and the crisis text line is one way that people are able to kind of hear them and respond to them. So what is the PLT doing? This is really an overview of what we are seeking to accomplish. And this is our action plan. Again, we're focusing on alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, and vaping. Those are the 3 most frequently used substances locally, as well as mental health and wellness. So really our goal is on the IYS to see those numbers continue to come down for youth self-reports on 30-day usage for substances, for alcohol, marijuana, and tobacco and vaping. As far as alcohol is concerned, we'd also like to work with community members to change policy for social hosting ordinances, meaning that there are consequences for adults who allow youth to have access to and use alcohol in their homes. And then we'd also like to continue reducing permissive norms among parents, meaning it's okay if you use here, as long as you're doing it here and you can be safe. Kind of those thoughts that parents have that it's okay to use. We'd really like to work to kind of bring some of those down. Some of the same goals for marijuana, in addition to assisting communities with prevention policies. Moving over to mental health, same idea, we'd like to see numbers continue to go down on the IYS for youth reporting periods of depression. PLT is also working to coordinate crisis intervention, which is part of the crisis text line that I talked about, as well as mental health first aid trainings for students and our school resource officers working with kids in our schools. And then finally, we want to keep working to develop mass media campaigns to reduce the stigma of mental health. If anyone is interested in joining the PLT, our meetings are open. We would love to have you. We meet the last Wednesday of every month from 9 until 10:30 a.m. A lot of our meetings are done virtually on Zoom. You can check out our website, which is DuPagePLT.org, and you can find all the information for our meetings. We would love to have more people join us from the faith-based and business sectors. So if you know anybody who might be interested, please send them our way. And there's also a lot of opportunities to get involved hands-on through PLT. We have some work committees, the school committee, data, policy and communications. So if you're interested in working with us, we would love to have you. Please contact our project coordinator, who I just want to say is fantastic, Jordan Esser. If you need anything, she will work with you. She will help you. She will make sure that you have data, resources, information, make professional connections. So please don't hesitate to reach out to Jordan if you have questions, would like to join the PLT, or we can just be of assistance in some way. Okay, so I'm really happy to introduce our keynote speaker and panelist for today. Our keynote speaker is Carissa Sable from Linden Oaks Behavioral Health. Ms. Sable is a clinical therapist and lead for the Linden Oaks St. Charles Outpatient Program, where she currently runs the dual diagnosis adult program. After Ms. Sable's keynote, we will hear from some expert panelists on issues related to adolescent substance use and mental wellness, and I will introduce them later. And so without anything further from me, thank you all for joining us. Ms. Sable.
All right. Hello, everyone. Like this wonderful introduction, thank you so much. Like she had stated, my name is Carissa Sable. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and a certified alcohol and drug counselor. I've been working in the field for the past 5 to 6 years, working in outpatient, residential, and hospital settings for substance abuse treatment primarily. I've had a history of working with both adults and adolescents and have gained perspective on how mental health develops through aging. I have a history of, I am extremely passionate about substance abuse treatment and educating those on what substance use disorders are to community members and to fellow professionals. You will hear me say substance use disorder and rarely hear me use the word addiction. I personally strive away from using addiction because it tends to give a perspective that substance abuse isn't a problem until it becomes an addiction or dependence. I do not believe that to be the case, and that all forms of substance abuse and misuse need to be taken seriously and properly treated. For what I have learned over the course of my career is that substance use disorders are the Band-Aid on a much deeper mental health wound that have yet to be healed. A significant number of my adult patients have a history of trauma, and their substance use came much after due to their inability to cope with their emotional understanding of what had happened to them. It concerns me more to see what even our hospital has been undergoing this major crisis when it comes to the fallout of COVID-19 and the mental health impact that it has, especially on our adolescent population. Giving our community, and most importantly, our adolescents, the proper education on their own mental health and subsequently their substance use is pivotal in ensuring that we do not continue recent trends in what we have seen over the past couple years. I'm going to take some time and transition and talk about understanding the science of substance use disorders. I think it is extremely important to acknowledge what is going on within the brain when it comes to a substance use disorder. Surveys have shown, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, reported that 20 million adults with substance use disorders, 30% of them had a co-occurring mental health disorder in 2017 alone. Most of my patients I see present with co-occurring disorders, which often means other mental health disorders coinciding with their substance use disorder. And usually this begins in childhood and early adulthood. So first, we're going to be explaining, like I said, understanding what the brain is going through, what is actually going on behind substance use disorders. It is a very common misconception that substance use disorders are caused by choice of an individual alone, and they solely are responsible for the negative consequences of choosing to participate in that behavior consistently. However, over time, the brain is hijacked by substance use, and that is no longer a simple choice by an individual, but rather a need for survival. A major theory that is estimated to cause substance use disorders is known as the hedonic homeostatic dysregulation. I know it's quite a mouthful. This means is that the brain can no longer regulate to homeostasis or balance of conceptualizing reward and pleasure. This theory capitalizes on 3 stages that the brain gets inadvertently stuck in, which is initiated by first binge intoxication, which is obviously when we ingest the substance, whether that be alcohol or other drugs. Next, leading into that withdrawal and negative effect when we start to lose the effect of the substance and we start to miss and essentially experience negative effects, such as many, like say for alcohol, that hangover, that withdrawal, and then leading into that preoccupation and anticipation, which seeking that period of substance use again. What I've seen personally when working with clients is that their substance use may initially be a way of having fun, stress relief, or to let off steam in their life. However, over the course of time, this becomes more of a means to solely manage stressors, difficult relationships, a job they don't like, or simply mental health symptoms they do not know how to manage otherwise. It becomes a sole means to cope. When this is initiated, this is when the true cycle of abuse begins. This diagram shows the hedonic homeostatic dysregulation theory within the brain and the different parts of the brain in which are affected when substances enter the brain. And this is all substances. This includes cannabis, this includes alcohol, this includes methamphetamine, any particular substance. This is the cycle in which the brain is impacted by substance use. I want to acknowledge I am no neuroscientist, but I will do my best to explain what I've come to learn into this delicate system. The beginning of this cycle is first initiated within the thalamus, which is that blue, as you can see in the beginning of this cycle. It's kind of color coordinated, which is nice to kind of follow along with. The thalamus, which is that center part of the brain, is responsible for sensory input and large motor output. This is why substances are disorientating, can dull those senses, and a large motor function such as walking or driving are negatively impacted. Then it impacts the hypothalamus, which is kind of tucked underneath the thalamus. So the thalamus is that long, elongated blue section of the brain. The hypothalamus is directly underneath, which is responsible for the emotions, thirst, hunger, circadian rhythm, creating homeostasis and control of our autonomic nervous system or organ control. So you might hear, like a lot of the times when somebody uses a significant amount of substances, they may lose control of their organ control, they may need to pass out, they may have those high mood swings, becoming very tearful very easily. This is the part of the brain that is being impacted when we're ingesting a substance. After receiving the intoxication effects of the substance, when we enter into what they call that withdrawal and negative effects stage, which lies mostly within the amygdala. So now we're entering that red phase of this diagram. The amygdala, which is the oldest part of our brain. For some reason, scientists call this our lizard brain. Don't ask me why. Don't understand why they call it that. Maybe to emphasize the fact that it's old. That is my best guess. But this is our oldest part of our brain. This part of our brain is responsible for telling us what is important for survival and a key component in memory. So not only is it letting us know how and what we need to survive, it's telling us what we need to remember to keep surviving moving forward. So when we enter that withdrawal and negative effect, that amygdala is heightened because it's telling us, wait, this was good, we need this, remember this. At this time, in a substance use disorder, the amygdala, like I said, is notifying us of that survival piece, but then leads into, as we go into that preoccupation phase, our orbital lobe and hippocampus, which is our decision-making and continued processing of memory. This is causing that decision-making, and it's causing that remember this, continuing from our amygdala into our hippocampus. So it does seem like substances are fueling this cycle and responsible for many people to become victims of this disorder. However, substances actually are hijacking a key component in an important chemical within the brain that is really truly fueling a lot of these different parts of the brain being heightened. This chemical is known as dopamine. Dopamine is the, again, main component of substance use disorders that are being negatively impacted. It is a neurotransmitter within the brain that naturally occurs in our body, again, telling us when something is rewarding, pleasurable, or important. Dopamine used to be kind of associated as the pleasure system, when in reality, a lot of times we have shifted away from using the word pleasure because sometimes it's telling us not necessarily something that is just pleasurable, but actually something that is rewarding, something to do again, even if it's not something that we enjoy. So like this neurotransmitter is located within the midbrain nuclei, mainly that VTA. I apologize, again, not a neuroscientist. Sometimes pronunciation of the different parts of the brain are not my forte. But this part of the brain is in the center within all those different, like I was showing earlier. Let's see if it'll go back. Yeah, it did. So in the center of the brain, dopamine is being housed. That is the main part in which substances are being impacted. So dopamine is responsible for telling us what to eat, sleep, stay hydrated, seek shelter, sex, and even survival, right? So it's telling us, do this again, this is what's good for us. I want to apologize again. I am not a graph maker, but This is actually pretty similar to what I create when I'm running groups with patients that are trying to understand why things aren't as enjoyable in their life anymore. And this is what I end up drawing on the board for them. So when we ingest a substance, we initiate the hedonic homeostatic dysregulation through dopamine. Usually when I start off this, I give the example of give me a food that everybody loves to eat. I chose mac and cheese just because that's what I was thinking about that day. But it's usually we think of a food that instantly gives us that reward. Like, oh, everybody can think of that favorite pasta dish or their favorite pizza place. And the same thing with like guitar, a hobby that we find enjoying, like going rollerblading or drawing or painting. These different things release dopamine. Because over time, we have evolved and made dopamine more complex than just simply, I got food, food is good, moving forward. We now are even understanding that guitar is rewarding. It's helping us feel fulfilled, motivated, and therefore we should do it again in order to seek that reward, that survival, in order for us to feel full. So over time, that dopamine is released with eating mac and cheese or playing guitar. But what happens is substances will trigger larger amounts of dopamine that surpass the threshold of what we normally tolerate in that day-to-day. So our threshold, that lovely little horizontal green line, hangs out there. Usually we'll hit things that like get close to it, we'll feel really good, but eventually over time when we start to introduce substances, it breaks that threshold completely. You may have heard people say in the past, I'm chasing that first high. I'm chasing that first drunk. It's never going to be the same. And guess what? It's not. Because we completely overwhelmed the system within our brain and telling us, holy crap, this is so rewarding. This is so good. I have to do it again. And so this cycle continues. And what happens is over time, we rush dopamine again over and over and over within the brain that it breaks this threshold, and other things that used to be rewarding are no longer rewarding. You can kind of see it, again, graph skills not the greatest, but that threshold is all the way at the top now. Now alcohol is not even meeting that threshold. Not to mention that eating mac and cheese and playing guitar is absolutely nowhere near feeling as good as it used to. So these activities no longer become enjoyable, and all that time is replaced with seeking and receiving the substance. This is why a lot of the times we will ask ourselves, why do they keep choosing, drinking over their family? Why do they keep calling off work just to go get high? It's because of the system. It's impacting our decision-making part of our brain and saying that this is more important because this is so much more rewarding. This is so much more that I need to survive. So understanding the science of substance use disorders, it's very important then relaying the information of what is going on in a developing brain, right? So we were looking at a fully developed brain. Therefore, the following information is acknowledging key components of the brain that are still growing and developing that can be negatively impacted by substance use. The adolescent brain from ages 12 to 18 go through dramatic changes as it prepares for young adulthood. A lot of the times they say it's not specific stages, but rather a continuum that engages over time. These two main pieces of the brain that I want to focus on that are significantly developing at the time because they're in relation to where substance use disorders are impacting. The first one being this brain region is not only responsible for motivation, but for planning complex cognitive behavior, personality expression, decision-making, and moderating social behavior. This part of our brain is still developing when we are young. Arguably, our brain doesn't fully develop until we're 25. But this is still growing. This is still maturing. And the next part of the brain that I really want to acknowledge is that ventral stratum, which is responsible for tracking the subjective value of stimuli, signaling the presence of and expectation of reward, and encoding errors and outcomes of such predictions. We just spent maybe 4 slides talking about how dopamine is the reward system. And one of the biggest parts of the brain that is still developing in adolescence is literally the presence and expectation of reward. So if we are introducing substances at a young age, we are possibly really negatively impacting this part of the brain. I want to take some time and acknowledge the research that shows how significant substance use can cognitively stunt an adolescent's brain development. So like I said, when substances are added to this process, there are areas in which research shows that this is cognitively stunting this brain development. And this is just some of the places of the brain. I didn't even finish. I literally was going through at least 10 different research articles that were not only collecting other research articles, but even their own findings. And this is just a sample of what I found. First one being delays in neurocognition, volume changes. The actual size of different parts of the brain are smaller when significant substance use is introduced. So our hippocampus, like we were talking about earlier when talking about the cycle of substance use disorders, is our learning and memory, which then again, that volume has been found to be smaller. And then white matter being our nerve fibers and nerve cells that kind of help create that fluidity within the brain. And not only the size of our white matter, but our white matter quality within the brain. In a 2009 longitudinal study, it was found with heavy alcohol use that the left hippocampus and the ventral prefrontal cortex were significantly smaller than those of light alcohol drinkers over time. For cannabis use, even after 4 weeks of abstinence, a study showed that adolescents scored lower on performance tests with cognitive flexibility, visual scanning, error commission, and working memory. In a verbal encoding, so talking about later down the line as in that brain functioning to verbal coding, it was found in a comparison to binge drinkers to abstinent adolescents, it showed that there were slightly poorer initial verbal learning, disadvantaged verbal processing, and decelerated learning. In another study, stating even after 28 days of sobriety from cannabis, so this is not even in the midst of use, this is even after 28 days of not using cannabis, showed that adolescents had an increased brain processing during inhibition despite showing intact task performance. I had to read that sentence like 5 times. But what it means is that this discussion requires much more effort for somebody who has an impulsive urge to think through, do I act on this impulse? Even though that person, even after 28 days of sobriety, was able to not follow through on that impulsive behavior, it took them significantly longer to process and understand I should not act on that impulse compared to those that were abstinent users. Due to the nature of the adolescent brain and still overcoming developing parts of the brain, such as impulsivity control and expectations, long-term substance abuse beginning in adolescence reinforces the properties of the drug. Think about that. So when we're under, let's say, the influence of alcohol or cannabis, we are more impulsive. We are not really thinking through decisions. But if we started significant substance use in adolescence, we're actually reinforcing those properties into just long-term health issues within our brain. I know this is a lot of information, but this is important because at the end of the day, these are real things that are happening within the brain when it comes to significant substance abuse in adolescence. So now as we transition and talk about some of the statistics that we are seeing in regards to not only all of this information that I had just given you, but really kind of seeing what is it looking like, not only on a national level, but on more of that local level. I want to acknowledge first and foremost that we are facing a mental health crisis within our adolescent population. When March of 2020 began and everything was shutting down, I was placed on our hospital job pool to help assist Linden Oaks transition into to help transition all their psychiatrists to telehealth visits in order for them to meet with their patients. I joked to alleviate the stress of the situation by calling myself an FLH. I was a fancy laptop holder. But what I gained from this experience was being in the middle of this ever-growing mental health experience and crisis for our adolescents and seeing how it progressed over time. It was like an interesting way of being a fly on the wall, watching how it had occurred. The severity of the symptoms we were seeing in our adolescents was nothing new prior to the pandemic. We were seeing high acuity within our adolescent population well before 2020 hit. However, COVID-19 helped ignite the flame that was already kindling within this population. I saw firsthand when our hospital went from a 1 adolescent ward to 3. We had to close our detox unit and have it merge with another in order to accommodate the number of adolescents in need of treatment. We had to then accommodate and additionally add a triage area for teens awaiting a bed to become available. So not only do we have 3 wards, we had to create a whole separate area in order for our adolescents that were waiting to get a bed to be transitioned onto the unit. Our outpatient programs for adolescents, at one point, we had over 100 adolescents waiting to get into our programs for outpatient treatment. But don't take my word for it alone. It has been data that has been growing well before the pandemic. In a 2019 study, 37% of adolescents reported persistent sadness and hopelessness. 2019. And this was already an increased statistic before the pandemic over the course of 10 years, whereas in 2009, only 26 reported these symptoms. 19% in 2019 seriously considered attempting suicide, compared to 14% in 2009. 16% made a plan for suicide in 2019, and 9% actually attempted, compared to 11% and 6% respectively in 2009. This data is collected every 2 years, and 2021's data has not been released yet. But we were on an uptrend well before the pandemic, and with what our community, our families, and our own adolescents, I cannot imagine this number to be lower than it was in 2019. 358,000 adolescents in 2018 not only had a major depressive episode, but then also had a co-occurring substance use disorder. Again, this is important to acknowledge because just like we were talking about earlier, adolescence and substance use can go very hand in hand. And just like I was explaining earlier, while I currently work with our adult population within the hospital, a lot of my patients will often acknowledge that their mental health issues and struggles had began well in their adolescence and eventually developed into a substance use disorder. I wanted to also take some time to acknowledge some 2016 results and compare it to some more recent research in leading causes of death for children and adolescents in 2016. Research showed that the leading cause of death was not due to injury was motor vehicle accidents for children and adolescents. And at the time, drug overdose and poisoning was the 6th leading cause, with unintentional overdoses being the majority contributor to this cause of death. So I acknowledge the difference between the two, right? Because adolescents do utilize substances to attempt suicide. However, adolescents sometimes simply use substances not knowing what's in the substance. If you're buying, let's say, cannabis off the street or pressed pills, you don't know if it's laced with fentanyl. I've had plenty of patients say, I tried cocaine for the first time after I found out that it was in my joint that I just bought. accidental overdoses are very real. And that number that is stated, 761 number of deaths, is significantly larger than our suicide rate of 123. My eyes aren't the greatest. So then, this leads me to the leading causes of death for children and adolescents in 2020. This is a graph that shows how it has progressed over time. Comparing to the previous one, where we were in the 6th spot, in 2020, overdose, drug overdose and poisoning has now become the 3rd leading cause of death for adolescents and children. This is an 83.6 increase from 2019 to 2020. Unintentional poisoning had also increased from 110% from 2019 to 2020 as well. It is also important to acknowledge that the #1 cause of death for adolescents and children was no longer motor vehicle crashes, it was firearms. These statistics are stark and real and scary. But for Illinois, over the course of the past years, and data collected from the CDC, Illinois had over 6,000 deaths associated with overdose and poisoning for children and adolescents. And this graph accounts for ages 10 to 19. And 2020's deaths accounted for 9.9 of the state's total deaths for children. Our numbers dropped in 2018 to 2019, but did increase back up to our numbers close to 2017. A lot of the times when I work with patients and we get to the why of understanding what's going on, a lot of them will present themselves to me and state, what do I do with this information? I know I'm anxious, I know I have trauma, I know I have a problem with substances, but now what do I do about it? And that's the next thing. I give you all this information on what is a substance use disorder, how does it impact the brain, what are the statistics that we're seeing within our communities and within our country, but what do we do next? And the biggest thing is creating education around substance use. Prevention for substance abuse in children and adolescents are effective in 3 areas. It is effective within our schools, our families, and our communities. These 3 areas are significantly important when it comes to working with adolescents, because these 3 things are arguably their whole life. They are with their family all the time. They are in school all the time. It's their job. And the community is enveloping and surrounding them and fostering these 2 parts of their life. So it is important to create education and understanding in these 3 areas of an adolescent's upbringing, education, and life. The first, I wanted to take some time and talk about school-based prevention. There are 3 different areas that effective school-based prevention programming focus on that have positively shown to educate and reduce risk of future substance use in adolescents and children. And these 3 areas being the social skills training, normative education, and competence enhancement skills training. Social resistance skills training looks at effectively educating children and adolescents to resist peer and media influences to substances. And not only is it a way of challenging high-risk situations and direct pressure with healthy communication skills, it also helps create counter-arguments for any misleading information created within media or just simply within their peers. So one of the biggest things when I first entered the field as a clinician in substance use treatment was I was at the height of cannabis was the cure-all. It was hard to argue with a patient that was like, this is good for me. It's natural. I don't understand why you need me. It's not addictive. And having to educate and understand that cannabis is just as addictive as any other substance. While it releases different amounts of dopamine compared to, like, let's say methamphetamine, it's still addictive. And now my favorite argument nowadays, at least for cannabis, is that when somebody says, well, it's all natural. Well, we've kind of genetically modified the crap out of it by now that it's like nowhere near what it was 20 years ago. Normative education then primarily focuses on challenging normative ideas of substance use within the adolescent population. A lot of like how I challenged it simply by some of the anecdotal things that I tell my patients. Identifying ways to help challenge what adolescents have been misled to believe as normal within substance use, and pulling local data in order to make it more relatable to present adolescent populations. On top of looking at normative data, it's also important to include popular misconceptions of the accessibility of substance use or the misconceived lack of danger that comes with substance use. A lot of my adult patients, whenever I talk about the significance of what substance use disorders have on the brain, they usually say, why didn't I learn about this before? All I got was the fried egg image and say, don't do it. And a lot of the times my patients appreciate this education because my philosophy when doing therapy is that I cannot tell you how to live your life. That is your decision. You are your own human. You have your own free will. But what I can do is give you the education, the tools, the understandings, and the risks that you possibly will take if you do decide to go back to substance use. And usually that is a more powerful tool when they have that education than simply me telling them, you can't do drugs. Competence enhancement skills training may be a mouthful, but it is meant to acknowledge that social learning process is an important factor when it comes to substance use prevention. Many kids that have low social skills may be more susceptible to substance use and may be using substances as a coping strategy to their difficulty with social personal skills. As many people like to say, gives me liquid courage, or whatever slogan comes after. This is real. A lot of people will turn to substances to make it easier to socialize. So it is the wonderful thing about those particular skills is not only can it be applied to the substance use and understanding it, it can apply to pretty much any aspect of their life, that they can apply those social skills to their everyday. These are 3 evidence-based programs that I had found that really leaned into these 3 particular trainings: life skills training, project towards no drug abuse, and brief alcohol and drug screening for college students, that addresses all 3 of those different areas and educating and knowing and allowing them to have that information for themselves. Next, I'm going to be talking about that family-based prevention. It is clear that when it comes to this form of prevention, family-based prevention is meant for the parents, guardians, or family members exclusively. From what I've learned over my experience as a clinical therapist, when working with adolescents, family dynamics is a key to fostering healthy mental health healing. So these programs are not necessarily meant for the adolescents. They are meant for the parents, for the guardians, for those family members, those caretakers, because they are just as much of this part of this process as their adolescent. They're growing up seeing, experiencing their family around them. And so, such as Family Matters, creating lasting family connections, and brief strategic family therapy, all evidence-based programs that can help educate our family members on how to help support their adolescents with substance use treatment, how to really engage in those resistance skills, what are rule setting, and ways to reduce aggressive or antisocial behaviors if it becomes severe enough. Lastly is that community-based prevention, focusing on identifying that public policy, community activities, mass media campaigns to help support the whole community, right? Community-based prevention is really enforcing and encouraging that fostering of education within families and within our adolescents. And when we are able to provide it, it can create further support and again, in educating in those dangers of substance use. PLT does a fantastic job showing the data that it's done in reduction in substance use. This works. When we educate, when we involve ourselves as a community, This is how we can come together in order to make sure that everybody understands the dangers of significant substance use, how we help all of our populations, whether it is our family members, whether it is our adolescents, whether it is the healing of our community, to better understand how we grow together within it. Substance use disorders are preventable through education. So many times, like I've said, we've heard the just say no. We've heard the just don't do it, or hey, you can do it a little bit. But in reality, we need to have the power of this education around us in order to make sure that everybody is knowledgeable of the impacts. What is a substance use disorder? What is happening in our country, our state, our local community, and how can we come together to educate, to support, and allow us all to heal within one another. Thank you guys so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, Carissa. All that information is really, really enlightening and helpful and giving me a lot to think about. Okay, so next I would like to introduce our panel. Our panelists today include Ava Blaylark. Ava is a school social worker at Glenbard East High School. Amber Quirk is the assistant superintendent at the DuPage County Regional Office of Education. And Dagmar Kaufman. She is the founder and executive director of On Balance Parenting. So Ava, I will throw it over to you.
Make sure my braids aren't in the way. You guys can actually hear me. It's going to look like I have a lot of notes here as I'm flipping through these pages, and I do, but I'm not going to be super long either. Carissa gave us a lot of really good information, and so I just want to kind of, what's my word? Get a little and so you kind of mentioned, right, substance use disorders and how a lot of times people will use it to cope with things that they've been through, right? And so a lot of what I talk about is ACEs, and I'll also ask a couple questions because it makes me less nervous if I feel like you guys are participating. And then I also don't want to talk about something that you guys know about. So just a quick show of hands, who's heard of ACEs? Awesome. So you guys have heard of the adverse childhood experiences. So you know that there are 10 of them that focus on abuse and neglect, and then things that family members experience, like incarceration, a family member with mental illness, or abandonment, or even death of a family member. Those are all ACEs. And the most important thing I think about ACEs is that it let us know that it's not just a problem of working class communities or a problem of communities of color, right? Because this study was done with predominantly white, educated, middle class families. And what they found is that it's the basis for a lot of common health problems. So it's a predictor of later mental health, disease, and even death, and just overall social functioning and well-being. Right, so people who have experienced trauma have a higher chance of experiencing mental health issues like anxiety and depression and PTSD and substance use disorders. So, but there's a new ACE in town, right? And that new ACE is COVID. And we kind of joked about COVID being the gasoline to a fire that was kind of already starting. In December of 2021, the U.S. Surgeon General issued a mental health crisis for our young people. But as Carissa mentioned, even before the pandemic, there was an alarming number of young people who struggled with feelings of helplessness, depression, and thoughts of suicide. So before the COVID-19 pandemic, we had 20% of children ages 3 to 17 who were experiencing a mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral disorder. And so you think about that age 3, like that's at 3, you're, it's terrible 2s and 3s. You're supposed to just be running around getting into stuff. But 20% of our students were, experiencing disorders. You talked about just the increased attempted suicides and things like that. So COVID, again, was just that fire to the gasoline. And one particular statistic is that between March and May of 2021, the emergency department visits for suspected suicide attempts for girls was up 51% for girls ages 12 to 17. So that's something that I talk to my girls about a lot. So this pandemic, and it's a collective global trauma, right? Like we, all went through it. And this is something that our young people, they've never seen anything. We've never seen anything like it, but they've never experienced this global kind of trauma. So it really did disrupt their lives. And the pandemic also heavily affected our populations that were already vulnerable to begin with. So our students of color, our students who live in immigrant homes, our homeless youth, our LGBTQ plus youth, they were all even more affected. Our homeless youth, our youth in juvenile and probation services and things like that. So, like you said, it really is kind of a serious issue. She introduced me. I'm one of the social workers at Glenbard East High School. And so I guess I want to ask, are the two top discipline problems that we're seeing in Glenbard, does anyone maybe have a clue of what those two top things might be? You can just yell it out because, Truancy. Mm-hmm. That's definitely one. What's the other one? Vaping, right? So substances, right? Vaping is literally our number one. It's the reason why almost all of our students who get an alternative to suspension is because of vaping, right? They get caught, and it doesn't matter that we tell them that we have vape alarms in the bathrooms. They don't seem to care. I'm just why you gotta do it at school? But they know the tricks, right? They know which bathrooms to go into. They know how to not make the alarm go off. And they say that a lot of times they don't get caught, but a lot of times they do, because it literally is the number one reason why students are in our alternative to suspension. It's what we're talking to them about. So they're vaping in the bathroom, and also there's always the bathroom. And then truancy and attendance is also one of the top concerns as well. And it's always been an issue, but again, COVID kind of exacerbated it, right? And what we're seeing is that a lot of students that return to full-time in-person learning was really a hard transition for our students, and the anxiety, whether it's social anxiety, and they're not able to get along with friends or make connections with their peers, that's a big deal. And some of them are just anxious about school in general. It's academic anxiety, like test anxiety, or they're worried about being called on in front of, their peers, or, they're not connecting with their teachers. So those are really the top two concerns that we're seeing in Glenbard. There's a quote that I use all the time, and it says that if adolescents can't make sense of their suffering, the world will have to pay for it until they can. And so how do we help them to make sense of their suffering? And so I always say the top two things are building relationships, because young people, I think, feed off of adult energy, and then also letting them know that, they're valued, that they're not alone, and that there's value in their voice. So those are kind of, two of the top things that I kind of talk about. I told you it looks like a lot, but it's not really a lot.
That's it?
Mm-hmm.
Like Jennifer said, my name is Amber Quirk, and I work for the Regional Office of Education. And I'm going to focus a little less on the qualitative data and share some of the anecdotal data I have from serving on multiple networks. Some of the networks I help co-facilitate are the High School Social Work Network, K-8 or K-12 Social Work Network, School Nurse Network, Elementary Principal Collaborative, and a Middle School Principal Collaborative, and school counselors. So I would say across all of those networks, the topics that the participants were most interested in learning about this year were vaping, and or substance abuse in general, and how to help students' mental health. So across 42 school districts, we have different representatives. on the different networks, and I think it's kind of confirming the from Ava experiencing at Glenbard East. The different representatives I've seen across our county are saying similar things. Each of the groups reported that students are exhibiting more social anxiety, more school refusal behaviors. I also happen to run our truancy department at the ROE, and we are seeing a lot more students that are exhibiting the full-on refusal to go to school, really struggling once they were out to be able to get back into the building. Compared to maybe in the past, we would have had more students that, they might get the first letter from our office and then go back. So definitely an increase with that as well. I would say all the networks have reported an increase in crisis situations this year and hospitalizations. They are seeing an increase in externalizing behaviors, so the fighting or disagreements or acting out that they would see in classes. It was as if students just didn't know how to act in school anymore and follow expectations. And a lot of the school personnel were indicating that they were trying very hard to really reinforce those expectations for students, to be very explicit in teaching those expectations, because they were seeing that increase in that behavior. Not only did I hear this next example from across the networks, but I was in a national meeting through the organization called Why Try, and multiple people on that Zoom call said the same thing, that the students are really exhibiting behaviors showing they are socially behind. I'm sure I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding in the audience that they're either unable to regulate their emotions or just don't have those social skills to interact with each other. So we're definitely seeing that across the county. And although both Jennifer and Chris's statistics show that maybe our substance use in DuPage County is down, we know with that mental health, the mental health struggles that the students are going through, I mean, we're hoping it won't swing the other way, but we need to be prepared for that. So I'm really actually very proud of our school districts here in DuPage County because I know they're trying multiple strategies to get ahead of this and to help the students right now. So I just wanted to talk about a few of those, and hopefully when you're ever meeting with anyone from schools, you can try to find out if they're doing it or mention it if they aren't. But some of those might be like related to truancy. They're working on school attendance groups in the school before the students get to the point where they're refusing to come in. That's hugely important. An increase in social emotional learning strategies and specific strategies for students to be able to cope with whatever struggles they're going through. There's definitely been an emphasis on that. In one of the networks, a group shared they do Wellness Wednesdays. So just making it more regular, a part of their day, part of their week. Multiple schools said that it's just happening on a regular basis where they're having the kids practice those skills for coping. So I think the more we can get that in there, I talked to several of you already this morning about having mental health providers coming to the schools to help. That's hugely important. I'm very excited that a number of schools are already starting to do that, and hopefully more will be on that bandwagon to really help connect students with the help that they need early. Some other simple ones might be bringing in comfort dogs. One high school was talking about, multiple high schools said this, that the kids were kind of hanging out in their commons area, not going to class, just hanging out there, having a good time with each other. And one of the high schools shared their strategy was they had specific teachers who would come down during that time and do like a walk and talk to class. So they would bring the student with them and walk in the hallways. So it kind of served two purposes, getting them to class and also helping build the relationships like Ava mentioned, because that's hugely important. Many schools did what's called, or so they referred to it as an invisible student activity. So taking every student in the school and asking the staff members to identify what they know about that student. And then if you have an invisible student, it would be somebody that nobody can say they know anything about them. And then the reverse of that is having students identify a trusted adult in the building. So really trying to promote that this year with all of the groups, because that relationship building is definitely key. Through the networks that I'm on, I was able to bring in Dr. Patricia Grazik, who focuses on school anxiety and school refusal behavior. She's out of UIC. And really looking at schools having what's called a multi-tiered system of support. And they have to use data to help identify students in need, and then based on what their need is, then getting them the support, and depending on what level that might be, whether it's more of a tier 2, where small groups are meeting, or tier 3, if they need very intense support. The school counselors brought in an expert on executive function skills and neurodiversity. Her name was Lisa Marsicano, and she spoke about helping students rebuild confidence in themselves and in their academics. And in her presentation, she talked a lot about this increased reliance on technology and how that's impacting students and what that can lead to, because we have that loss of opportunity for the students to practice the social and communication skills, and not knowing how to deal with challenges, or even learning how to learn differently. So those are just a few of the things that we had going on this year, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to do in the future. I'm also honored to serve on the PLT under Jory's guidance, and one of the things I was really excited about our work on this year has to do with the student IDs. So the Illinois State Board passed a law, of course, and said you must have certain resources on the back of the IDs, and then there was no more information about it. So we decided to put together a toolkit that included the communication for schools, a sample to put on the back of the IDs with the exact numbers that we wanted with the word reach, so we would have that DuPage data coming back to us. And then we pushed it out not only to the principals and school buildings, but our office actually pushed it out to the companies that make the IDs. So because some of them, trying to be helpful last year, put some things on there, but everybody kind of had a different thing going on. So we're really trying to bring together our resources to have more consistency across all 42 school districts. So I am very excited about that. I'm going to keep pushing that out there this year, and hopefully we'll have all 42 districts who use IDs having the same information on the back for the mental health support. We're also increasing our communication about the 5 mental health days. Again, ISB says students are allowed to take the 5 mental health days. I did hear from some high school people at the end of the year that magically 300 students the day after prom needed a mental health day. So,
Also senior ditch day.
And senior ditch day, yeah. So that's kind of unintended consequences, right? It's a good idea to think about the kids that need the mental health days, but you know, kids, they try to work the system. So, you know, but really trying to figure out how do we help kids with the mental health piece so that they don't end up with the substance abuse issues that Carissa talked about already. So that is all I have. Thank you.
Let me see if I can work this. There we are. Thank you for the introduction, Jen, and your sharing, Carissa and Ava and Amber. That was really interesting. I'm really excited to be here with you today. It's my first in-person speaking event after 2 years, and it feels really good to be here and connect in person. Unbalanced Parenting celebrates its 5th anniversary this month, which I founded as a resource center, a clearinghouse of sorts, to provide resources and food for thought to support parents, caregivers, and really anyone interested in raising joyful, resilient humans who lead wholehearted and balanced life, and to provide an opportunity to connect in community with Heart Talks, Parenting Courageously, and holding a space for conversation about society's definition of success and its impact on the well-being of our children, parents, and caregivers. But before I share my thoughts and offer an invitation to all of you to listen and reflect upon what teens have been telling us, and mirror they have been holding up to us, the adults, I would like to name that we've been experiencing extraordinarily difficult years filled with unimaginable loss of life, grief, disruption, and uncertainty. We have been stretched to our limits and beyond, while a bright light illuminated many issues our communities are called upon to address, including teen mental health. I'd like to lift up the life-supporting work that so many people and so many professions have been providing to support all of us. And this morning, I'd like to acknowledge the work of our healthcare professionals, educators, counselors, social workers, nurses, psychologists, public health professionals, and many more, including all of you here in the room. I know that you all had been working really hard before the pandemic, and then all of a sudden, often with little or no support, had to adjust literally overnight. I deeply appreciate all of you. We have been struggling, pivoting, adapting, and muddling through. Many of us are weary, tired, and burnt out. And in the middle of such upheaval and uncertainty where our hearts are breaking, I also think they can break open. I believe there's an opportunity for growth, healing, and new beginnings, an opportunity to reimagine how we live and show up in the world, to reacquaint ourselves with the values we hold dear, what our children and all of us need to flourish. And I use the word flourish intentionally. It means grow and develop in a healthy and vigorous way, especially as the result of a particularly favorable environment. And so this morning, I'd like to share what our teens have been telling us, the adults, what they would like us to reflect on, and I invite you to consider different approaches with which to begin to reimagine the future of teen well-being. What are teens telling us? In DuPage County, our students attend high-achieving schools, and they have been sharing with us that perfectionism, excessive competition in academics, athletics, extracurricular activities, and unrelenting pressure to succeed has caused chronic stress, which we know, as Carissa so beautifully described, can affect our mental and physical well-being. This holds true for many places across the country and is not unique to our area. Teens have been really vulnerable and honest and have been revealing how they feel inside of themselves. To illustrate, I'd like to share some student voices from 2007 and 2017, taken from focus group interviews and surveys conducted with middle and high school students by the Collaborative Youth Team in Naperville. And I quote, "At age 12, you've got to have a life plan. Sometimes I wish I could be just a kid. I'm smart, and although I ace my tests, I have a hard time doing my homework because at the end of the day, I'm exhausted and want to sleep. Homework clubs my parents' expectations, and tests are super overwhelming, and there's way too many things that we have to do in a small amount of time. Parents tell you to be your best, but they really mean be the best." End of quote. Extensive research by Dr. Sonia Luther, professor emerita at Columbia University's Teachers College and founder and executive director of Authentic Connections Group, shows that students attending high-achieving schools puts them at risk for developing mental health issues, including anxiety and depression, and puts them at higher risk of substance use. In 2018, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation identified 4 factors that put adolescents at risk: poverty, trauma, discrimination, and excessive pressure to achieve. In 2019, the National Academies of Medicine, Science, and Engineering added unrelenting pressure to succeed to its list of factors that put adolescents at risk, alongside youth who live in poverty, foster care, and whose parents are incarcerated. What are teens inviting us to reflect on? Teens have been really courageous in telling us that our narrowly defined concept of success is exhausting them. They have implored us to engage in some deep listening and understand in our hearts that good grades, test scores, college prep do not constitute self-worth. A high school junior expressed this well in a petition on change.org in 2017, calling for change after another classmate had died by suicide. And I quote, Start helping us find our dreams and give us the tools to achieve our dreams. Start understanding our priorities and stop implementing yours. Start treating us like people, not GPAs or test scores. Start defining success as any path that leads to a happy and healthy life. End of quote. In other words, teens have been sounding the alarm and pointing out that we have conflated grades and test scores with human worth. We have conflated academic tracks with human purpose, and we have conflated approval with love and belonging. Students are asking us to value them as human beings and for space to follow their inner voice, to grow by deepening inside of themselves, to be who they are. Teens want to be loved for who they are and not who we want them to be. They're exhausted, burnt out, checking things off a list that supposedly lead to success. And I dare say that many adults in our community feel the same way. Teens have been holding up a mirror to all of us saying, we're done with chasing after things, accomplishing exterior things for the mere sake of fitting in. We want to be accepted for who we are. It is, as Brené Brown states so poignantly, love and belonging are irreducible needs for all people. In the absence of these experiences, there's always suffering. Our teens' mental health has been suffering because we have allowed a checklist of exterior accomplishments to constitute self-worth. We have mistaken fitting in with belonging. And the ensuing suffering is reflected in our teens' mental health. Healing and new beginnings. We are called upon to investigate the underlying causes and conditions that have led us to this moment, widen the array of possibilities, and plant seeds for a particularly favorable environment that allows our teens to flourish, to grow and develop in a healthy and vigorous way. We are called upon to sit with the discomfort that our teen mental health data elicit, without judgmental or defensive posture, and investigate and wrestle with our model of success that has impacted our children's well-being, and really all our well-being, because we are inextricably connected to one another. Children's well-being rests on the psychological health of their parents and caregivers, as well as educators and school staff well-being. Our US Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy, phrases the question like this, and I quote, "Society tells us to chase so many things, right? And whether it's good grades and a resume in school, or whether it's wealth, power, and fame, which is, I think, the big three goals that society tells us constitutes our self-worth. But the pandemic has made me rethink a lot of things. But one of them is, what are we seeking to give our children through their education, both in school and out of school? How can we best give them the best shot at living a healthy, fulfilling, and happy life?" These questions are invitations to deepen our understanding inside of us individually and collectively in the places and organizations we live, work, teach, and learn. They are hard and hopeful questions. They are a labor of love that requires every single one of us. Our Surgeon General also invokes the healing power of love and its derivatives, compassion and kindness. And this quote by him resonated deeply with me. "There is nothing more powerful that heals than love. And that starts with what we teach our children, with what we choose to practice, like in our day-to-day life, and fundamentally recognizing that public health is about more than policy and structure. It is about culture, values, and identity. And we anchor that culture, our identity, our values, and love. I think that will guide us to the place where we need to go and truly be healthy and happy, which is, I believe, what we all want." Another opportunity lies in rethinking our approach to adolescence. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, in its Adolescent Wellness Report, suggests that we stand at a crossroads and extend an invitation to think differently about adolescence. They write, "Researchers, policymakers, practitioners, parents, and funders stand at a crossroad in determining our nation's approach to adolescence. The traditional view holds that the adolescent years comprise a difficult phase to be endured and survived. But a newer approach considers adolescence to be an important time to nurture, guide, and support our youth to live the healthiest life possible. And the emphasis in that quote is mine. In other words, instead of containing our youth, we could consider adolescence as a period of practice, of growing into an adult. Another important piece for the future of our well-being comes to us from the field of neuroscience, mindfulness, which is a practice that is supportive of us in uncovering what we are feeling inside of us. Jon Kabat-Zinn, the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction, defines it like this. Mindfulness is the awareness that arises from paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment, with an attitude of kindness and non-judgment. Mindfulness is not a quick fix. It is the cultivation of a practice. And to give you a taste of it, I'd like to invite you for a short attention practice. If you would like to take a comfortable seat, feeling the feet firmly on the ground. The eyes can be soft, gazing or closed. Placing the hands on the thighs, palm up or palm down. Lifting up the back of the skull a little higher. Releasing the tongue away from the roof of the mouth. Feeling the lift of the neck without efforting or straining. Tipping the forehead forward just a little. Signaling the brain that there is no doing required. Sensing the balance. The feet on the earth. The sits bone in the chair. The solidity of the lower body and the uprightness of the spine. The openness of the chest. The way the head balances between the shoulders. Between the front of the body and the back of the body. Perceiving the subtle movements in the spine and the trunk. The way a river birch moves in the wind. Rooted, yet not rigid. Present to the entire body sitting. Awake to sensations in the front, the back, the sides. Sensations on the level of the skin, the air, clothing, and deeper sensations, internal to the body, pressure, muscular tension, or ease, or movement. Now paying attention to a single focus. Could be the breath, the hands, or feet. Or if an external focus is more accessible, perhaps sound. Allowing attention to land, to gather. Letting this focus be center stage. Everything else moving to the background. Moment by moment presence. And as you practice, attention will wander. It's the nature of the mind and attention. And whenever you notice that the object of attention has floated away, has disappeared, then this is the moment of practice. It is the present moment. And when attention has wandered, bringing it kindly and firmly back to the anchor, the feet, the hands, the breath, or sound. With the kind of kindness that we have for a dear friend. And no matter what has shown up in this practice, appreciating your effort, your presence, that you took your seat. Mary Oliver writes, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Over and over announcing your place in the family of things. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." Now slowly coming back into the room. If your eyes were closed, softly gazing. And I thank you very much for your presence and your kind attention.
Okay, thank you, Ava, Amber, Dagmar. Thank you for all your comments. Okay, so if anybody has questions, now is that time where you can go ahead and raise your hand, and someone with the tech staff will bring a microphone over to you. We'd like to be able to record the questions, which is why we would like to use the microphone.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen.
Hi.
Sound test, test, test. Oh, good. You should never give me a mic, but I just want to say that was excellent. Each and every one of you really provided us with some excellent information. And I know Jordan would want me to mention that be sure you stop back at the tables before you leave and talk to the providers that are here. We're here for resources. And of course, I have to mention the Glenbard Parent Series, which is a virtual weekly programming for caregivers, etc. And that brings me to my question. You've talked about, you really hit everything, I think. My question is about the caregiver, the provider, the self-care. Maybe the social workers or anyone else wants to comment about that, some strategies for those people. We know we have to fill our own vessel, as you mentioned, Dagmar, to give it away. So could you comment about that? Some other, you discussed the mindfulness, but maybe the modeling. What can caregivers do to best support their children?
Anyone?
Am I on? Okay, there I am. So, one of the things that I, talk to parents about especially is affirmation, right? So affirming your student, but that it also has to start with yourself, right? Because you have to practice and model affirmations, and you also have to practice and model healthy self-care, right? Because you can't pour from an empty vessel or give something that you don't have to give. And a lot of our support is around our students, our adolescents, which is important, but the adults, right, who are supposed to be building relationships, and we're the ones who have to support them, are also in need of support as well. So I was kind of telling you guys this morning, in Glenbard we use Ruler, which is Mark Brackett's out of the Yale Center for Social and Emotional Intelligence. And so our students will be getting that, but before we present it to the students, the first step is to present it to the adults. And one of the things that we found is we were doing a mood meter with our staff every Monday, and that they were always in the blue, right? So there are these 4 quadrants, and the blue is like the least energy and the least amount of pleasantness. And it kind of didn't matter, what was happening when we gave it, they were always in the blue. So we thought like before, winter break, it would go up, right? Because aren't we excited? We're going on break. No. Spring break. Yay. No. Summer break? Yeah. And so our adults, our parents, our teachers, our providers are in need of support as well. And they need that support, again, so that they can model healthy self-care and healthy coping strategies and healthy affirmations. So, we have to teach them to do that also. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, please, Amber.
I wanted to add one thing to that. I wanted to thank NEDFIS for our partnership this year, because one of their social workers came and spoke at each of the networks, kind of a self-care and stress management not 101. So for the healthcare providers and for the principal groups too, because we've had this training, we understand what we're supposed to do, but it's wonderful to be able to have a reminder of those things. So instead of coming at it for people who've never had that kind of experience before, I was really grateful that NEDFIS was able to come in and help us give that to the social workers, the counselors, the nurses. So.
Dagmar, did you have something to add?
Yeah, am I on? I also think, I think that's first of all, a great question, Gilda. I think it is what the Surgeon General talks about. It is becoming very clear about what we value. It is, of course, a wonderful thing to do the one thing that, to take a bath. But the one bath is not going to change anything long term. So if we become very clear about what nurtures us, what fills us up, and then make time for it, be very deliberate in making time for it. And while we investigate what is going on inside, also making very hard decisions that perhaps, there's only 5 things we can do and not 15. The ability to say no. And that over time, that is a practice that the kids are going to see, that is going to be modeled. And this is not just the parents and the caregivers, that is educators, that is all of us. And be courageous about it, because it's not selfish to take care of ourselves, it's essential. And we hear that a lot, but a lot of us haven't connected the head and the heart on it. And where we're at right now, we're trying to go we're employing the same strategies in the hopes it's going to somehow become different. And I think we're at a point where we really need to give ourselves time, even if we don't do all these things. Maybe we don't need to do all these things right now. Because the quieter and the calmer we are inside, the more actually we are going to achieve. I think in 2008, the PTA where I was serving, we co-wrote the Social Emotional Learning Resolution for the Illinois State PTA. And at the time, the literature said that once the whole idea was when you're calm inside, you are going to be better out here. And the better feeling and the achievement scores went up 11%. So I think it's really important that we drive home the message that we need to take care of ourselves. And we really actually need to mean it. Now, let me rephrase. Of course we mean it. We actually need to follow through on it. It's not enough to say, oh, please take care of yourself, and then there's no time allotted for you to actually be able to do it. And so we have to call for it, we have to call for it for ourselves, and we have to call for it in our workplaces and wherever we are, just like the Surgeon General talks about. I think it's very important.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to Amber's comment about being socially behind, because I think that maybe that plays into the substance use and the truancy and some of the other mental health issues maybe that stay isolated. But I guess the question is, are you seeing that at every school age group similarly? Are there differences? And the follow-up question to that would be, I can understand how schools can maybe find ways to achieve like academic gaps, but socially, I mean, that's not all going to fall at the schools, right? So do you have suggestions on how people can help their kids get there? And maybe the adults need help getting there too.
I would say I did hear it across all grade spans. You know, the high school groups talked about the kids were coming in and acting more like what they might see at 7th grade for 9th grade, which kind of makes sense given, you know, when they were home at remote learning, they didn't learn the same ways to act in school or with their peers. I think that, again, just comes back to teaching expectations as much as possible explicitly versus, you know, maybe in the past we could get away with kids, the majority of the kids just knowing how to do school and how to behave with their peers. But now we have to have that explicit teaching of how to interact with others, how to greet someone, how to deal with a situation when it presents a challenge. So I do think there's going to be more we have to do as a school, as schools. But I like what you're saying about it's not just the schools. Parents and families need that as well. This past year, we hosted a couple parent nights more focused on the school anxiety and school refusal behaviors, but I'm thinking, you just gave me an idea that maybe we need to have parent nights on how to help students socially. Gilda, I know you already have your whole lineup, but you know, just thinking. Okay, great. Then we'll promote that. Maybe you have something.
I think so. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say really quickly, I read an article, and the title, I think, was Why Are American Teens So Sad? And it was like, you know, it can't all be COVID because we know that the trends were already kind of increasing. And so it pointed to social media, right, and how kids are spending a lot of time on social media, and how they're not, you know, spending as much time just socializing and being outside, right? I'm an older millennial, so I feel like I got the best of both worlds. I was outside until the street lights came on, and I also got like Facebook in college, right? But, you know, our kids, they don't really get that. They're in front of the screen all the time. And then it also kind of pointed to parenting styles too, and how they are different, and how we try to protect our kids a lot, and we don't let them experience you know, things like, you know, my son is not going to be outside until the street lights come on because I don't trust it anymore. But, you know, so the schools, you know, obviously parents, you know, there's Glen Bar Parent Series, but parents need training to help our kids to socialize more. And then schools, right, that explicit teaching, right, that, you know, you're supposed to know just how to do school, but we have to kind of do away with that notion that they don't know how to do school, and that we do have to teach them how to identify their emotions, how to manage their emotions, how to make good choices, how to make responsible decisions. So yeah, that explicit teaching.
I would maybe just add to that, Ava, I think part of it starts with us as the adults, right? You don't maybe have to know every skill under the sun, but you can certainly do what comes naturally to you, and you can role model how to have empathy for someone else. You can role model how to have good social skills, and a lot of the learning that kids pay attention to is just through that observation. And so as a parent or as an adult, you might get overwhelmed, like I have so much I need to do, but I think sometimes we just need to go back to the basics. What do we know? What comes to us naturally? Our kids are always watching and paying attention. So if we're doing things that set a good tone, I think they'll follow suit.
Well, Ava, you just answered my question, because that's what my question was so much of what all of you talked about, and thank you. It was very interesting. The entire time, each person, I was thinking, how does social media play into this with the mental health, with, and I was going to ask you, Carissa, about dopamine and how they say social media and the teens and young people, adolescents, younger. If you find that, like if the dopamine rises and all of this, the time spent on social media and the anecdotal conversations I've had with principals this year, they have said they have spent the most time dealing with behavior issues that started on social media, not in school. So it seems like administrators, that is another reason why they are so exhausted. And it also seems that some of the education around social media might not, some of the lower income schools, the elementary principals are talking about the kids not sleeping because they are literally on their phones all night. So I just kind of was wondering how you feel that social media plays into all of this and what we should be doing as parents, caregivers, community members to help support kids so that they're not on social media all the time.
I'll kick it off. Wonderful book that literally came out, I believe, at the beginning of this year. It's called Dopamine Nation by Anna Lembke. I know, I have my eye on that. Her books are fantastic. Her most recent book, Dopamine Nation, is groundbreaking research in understanding substance use disorders, not only substances, but behavioral use disorders, such as social media. When I first started my career, there was a huge surge of research, especially I'm a gamer, so of course I'm so involved in understanding video game addiction, and what really had been coming up in early 2010s was what's known as microtransactions within video games. A lot of Eastern European countries had actually banned this form of gameplay in video games, where like loot boxes is actually signaling a lot of the same connectors in the brain as gambling. So a lot of those earlier behaviors are being encouraged. So social media does hit very similarly those same receptors. All behaviors tend to hit dopamine at various different levels. And that Dopamine Nation is a wonderful book that talks about how not only substances hit this, but also really acknowledging all the different behaviors that you can become inadvertently dependent on, and social media being one of that, such as like getting those likes on Instagram, those little hearts, or seeing people look and view your posts. And so this is something that is upticking and trending and is extremely concerning. I mean, even recent like media that have come out in the last 2 years are even acknowledging making passing jokes. I know a big upheaval of like people looking at like Bo Burnham's special on Netflix called Inside, and how he addresses like welcome to the internet, this whole song about how people just glom onto all these different things that the internet offers us, and yet we're creating a sense of dependency, whether it is socially or whether it is simply just to continue to hit that dopamine part of our brain. It's my little plug.
There's also, if I can, there's also a great resource. I believe it's a person who used to work at Google and Facebook. They founded Institute for Humane Technology, and there's a lot of good resources and things that you can do to, on your phone to disable notifications. Do you need to know every time anybody sends you an email, and just take charge of your time. Again, I think it's going back to sitting with ourselves and figuring out what is important to us, and that is going to take some time and some patience. That's not going to, we didn't get here in a year. We're not going to get out of this in a year, but I think it requires sitting with ourselves and talking to the kids about, like Carissa said, let's talk about the brain, what happens. So there's a lot of good resources there.
I think just practically, as a parent, it's just having that balance, right, for our students and trying to get them involved in other things and kind of doing other things. I think you mentioned, there's a gap with the school, right? When school shut down, my son was ending 5th grade, and then he didn't have a normal full school year until 7th grade. So we missed that entire first year of 6th grade where you kind of learn things, and so he kind of learned them in 7th grade, and it was rough for everybody. But we gave him Snapchat at 13 for his 13th birthday because he asked for it, and all his friends had it. I tell you guys, it didn't. It only lasted a month, and I was, you're not ready, right? We let them keep TikTok. I don't know if that's better, but just having those conversations like, this is what happens, this is what it looks like, but what people are posting isn't necessarily true, right? They're not hanging out at the mall every day. They're just reposting old pictures. Like, you're not missing out. And then finally we're just sort of like, no, you're not ready. And so sometimes you just have to look at it practically like that too. Like, what is your child ready for?
I'd like to piggyback off of that idea in that through our behavior interventionists that work on truancy, they also have a lot of families that the parents are saying, well, he stays up all night or she stays up all night on social media, like you mentioned. And one of the things we want to help put together, and I don't know how quickly this becomes obsolete, but I have an iPhone, and on my iPhone, I can control how much time my children spend on various apps, or I can eliminate apps that they can't go on them. And then there's downtime, and it shuts it down so they can't access anything after a certain amount of time. And I don't know how many parents I've heard say, well, how do you do that? Because they just need someone to show them how to do it. So we kind of ended the school year with, well, we're going to put together a nice little visual for parents to know how to do that on their iPhones. I don't know how Androids work, but I'm sure someone does. So we'll have to figure out how to help parents that way. So I think that just little piece of it, helping them limit their time, not necessarily saying they can't do it at all for all the things, right? But helping them develop that. Rules, yes, exactly.
Just as like what I was talking about in my presentation about those family-oriented programs in education, that rule setting is so important in educating our families, our caregivers, about what that looks like and having it be about them rather than like we were saying of having it have to be just about the kids. And so I think I absolutely agree. It's just figuring out what that balance looks like and what that rule setting really is.
What the family values look like.
Mm-hmm.
A question I had for you all, because I know a portion of us, I'm here if you're trying to find me. Hello. A question I had for you, because I know at least a portion of us in the audience are mental health providers or work for mental health organizations, are things we can be doing to help support you all in your work with kids and families, because you are the ones that primarily see them a lot. We see them either for short durations of time or for short periods of time. What we can be doing to help support you in your work.
I'll speak just personally. I didn't realize how much I was struggling within my own, my own mental health over the course of the past 3 years. And this was brewing, like we all were saying, before the pandemic. The pandemic just created the dumpster fire that was already building. And personally, I know that a lot of the times as a clinician, it's weird to say well, should I seek therapy or things like that? And I think that's a big thing that I really want more, is just saying how can we help each other? How can I seek my own therapist? How can I seek my own support? Is there support groups for fellow social workers within? How are you guys managing? Just as how you were talking about with the school of all the teachers being in the blue. How can we continue to provide resources for supporting one another within that field is the biggest thing for me, and having conversations about, that. I am more open about the fact that I see my own therapist. I treat my own mental health because I have to take care of myself to better care for the patients that I serve at my program. And I think having dialogues like that is so important. So I think that's the biggest thing that I really want to kind of see and encourage, is just let's talk about how we help each other and really what that looks like for one another.
Yeah, I would self-care for sure, and also say communication is going to be super important. And not that we all have to be saying the exact same thing, but we should kind of be on the same page, same wavelength. I think sometimes I've had that where, maybe something completely different is being said about getting a student into the building, and I'm like, no, we need you need to try to get get them in. So I think just the communication, so that we're on the same page, right? That we're saying something kind of similar, at least, so that because students they'll try.
Well, this one said
They're
this.
right. They're smart, and that
Even my adults do that, so it doesn't change when you get older.
So right, so there you go, right? But then it's no, we talked, and we all decided, right? Me and your therapist and your mom, you're gonna try to get in, So just that communication and kind of being on the same wavelength, I think would be really helpful.
Well, I just want to say first, I think we're really blessed here in DuPage County with our resources. We are resource rich. I was talking to some regional soups downstate, and I happened to mention the wait times at our facilities for getting mental health support, and they were like, well, we don't even have anything like that near us. So we are really fortunate to have that. I think coordinating our efforts would be really helpful. So many school districts are trying to utilize IRIS or other referral systems like referral GPS. So anything you can do to be part of those referral systems to help streamline and coordinate our efforts, I think would be huge.
One thing I think we might need to talk more about is that we, as human beings, we have all these feelings, and they're normal. Not every feeling is a disorder. And so I've lived in this community, worked this community 20 years, and it goes along with the perfectionism. If I am not always up and productive and busy, I'm somehow not good as. And I think we just need to have a wider conversation about the fact that we all have feelings, which I really like the mood meter that Eva was talking about, and talking to the kids and the adults about it. Because if we all go around and think, because this morning I felt a little off, this is a problem. No, this is life. What do I do to deal with that? So I think it would be really helpful for all of us and the kids that, because we have created this very narrow box into which we try to push everybody, and it creates even more dis-ease by doing that, because again, I'm not feeling good enough, and it just creates this cycle. I think it's really important that everybody knows, yeah, we are human, and that's fine.
Hi. Thank you, all your panelists' comments. Everything is amazing. My question is, sometimes as clinicians and mental health practitioners, we feel like we're preaching to the choir. All of us in this room are here because we're dedicated. We want to see change, right, in our community. How do we reach the people that aren't here? How do we talk to the parent that comes into my family therapy room and says, it's just his behavior and he's being disrespectful? It's not about mental health. It's not about, XYZ. That's what I struggle with in practice is, a lot of our parents grew up in different generations, right? And they keep saying that. It's disrespect. It's this issue. And sometimes we can use education, right? Psychoeducation, we can pound it in, and it just is not sticking. And so that's what I'm having struggles with. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that.
Yeah, I think.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I think in part, am I on? Thank you. I think in part, it is that connective piece, right? We're giving all this education, and it's fabulous, and it's absolutely needed. But the connection between the head and the heart is the longest way traveled. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think mindfulness, developing mindfulness about a practice, cultivating a practice is going to be really, really helpful, because over time people are going to understand inside themselves that there's different layers. I'm actually going to, in the fall, offer some introductory mindfulness-based stress reduction programs, because I think it's going to be very valuable just to take down the level of agitation. Because, of course, when people come in, they're so focused on the disrespect, they can't even hear, even if you're lucky enough for them to hear the educational piece about it, they don't see the different layers. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying. But I think mindfulness, to me, the cultivation of it, I have seen people go, it's an 8-week course that people go through. I have seen tremendous changes in people. And then if, once, because actually the brain changes as you engage in the practice over time. And I think at that point, too, if we do different things at the same concurrently, I think people are going to be able to have a better insight inside of themselves, because obviously it has nothing to do with the with the kid.
I think that non-judgmental piece of mindfulness is so generalizable. I mean, you've got somebody who's focusing on the child who's doing all this, and they're being very judgmental, but probably also some of that is out of fear that the people they're working with will also be judgmental toward them. So I really appreciate that mindfulness encourages us to just be generally non-judgmental, and I think when we feel supported and we don't feel judged, we're probably going to make more progress.
I would say that's been a cornerstone of how I've, with the history of working with the adolescent population program in the past, now with even our adults, my adults that have kids, and like, how do I navigate this new journey? And I think, again, that mindfulness piece like Dagmar was talking about, and just saying that non-judgmental, just really going in and leaning hard into validating that parental experience, and that it is absolutely hard. I hear that pain, I hear that frustration, and a lot of the times that's all that our patients really want to hear, is just to be validated that this is hard, that they're experiencing their own form of pain in the process. Granted, that insight and emotional awareness is going to be different from, family to family, patient to patient, but I think that non-judgmental stance that we can really embrace and support, and it is up to them whether they absorb it and take it, is in their hands. But I think really leaning hard into that, really giving them that space to say, whether it is that frustration, whether it is like they're just being absolutely rude, and validating that, and then trying to then encourage that change of mind. And, I think that's a wonderful point that you made, Dagmar, about like, we are capable of change, and even to the like DNA level. Like, it's insane how even like, I tell my adults that if you engage in sobriety for, let's say, 20 years, and you then have kids, your sobriety passes down in your heritability. So that changes your DNA. Like, we are capable to, once we engage in this journey of whether it is mindfulness, non-judgmental stances, or just encouraging us to kind of open our minds in a different way, that we are capable to kind of pass that along in our future. But it is extremely frustrating. I've argued with parents about locking up sharps. It's just, how do we validate that this is hard, and just really kind of lean into it? Then that in turn is, how do we then be kind to ourselves when we keep hitting that wall with some of our patients, for sure. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you to all the panelists, and tons of great information. And as a previous speaker mentioned, that all of us in the room are having these conversations in our networks and different things like that. And even, from a school perspective, I'm ready for the mindfulness mandate. Every hour, 3 to 5 minutes, a reset. The mindfulness revolution has to happen. If we are in a mental health crisis with our adolescents, our babies, preschool, kinder through 5, middle school, it's everyone. For the next 12 years, we will be in this crisis. At what point do the smart folks in the room, everybody who has a lot of capital in, our areas, how do we just say, no, this is what we are going to do intentionally, specifically, reset, retrain everybody. There is not one person that has not been affected by the pandemic. Not one. How do we do it? 12 hours a day, 3 to 5 minutes, hour on the hour. The horn that comes on every Tuesday in the county for tornadoes, right? We got all these other things that we're mandated to do, right? How do we start the mindfulness movement in our schools? The traffic lights at 7 a.m. to 7:03, they just stop wherever you are. Everything goes red. You just sit there. You just sit there. The trains, no trains leave. The train's either gone, it's gone by 7, or it's after from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. How can we do that? And especially in the schools. We got all these sophisticated technology bells. We can shut off Chromebooks, laptops, iPads. How do we do this? When do we say enough is enough? We know this, right? We know that teachers have the ability to look at the core parts of the standards. A student missing 3 to 5 minutes, right, of the teacher's perfect lesson is not going to cause them to crash. We've heard kids have to have all of these things nailed down about their future at 12. That is the biggest lie ever. We can't keep heaping all of these things on our kids, and at one point do the adults, the smart folks in the room, right? Listen to, what was heard from students in 2009 hasn't changed. Right? We do focus groups. The things that they said in 2009, the next group 10 years later, if they're saying the same thing, right? How do we get out of this cycle of insanity? Mindfulness movement, the mindfulness revolution, the mindfulness mandate. We have to do it.
I almost like the idea of now, if I'm probably going to steal that. Every time Tuesday, 10 o'clock, when the sirens are going off, we're going to do 5 minutes of even if it's just something that forces us to pay attention to whether it is that time of day or something like that. Why can't we just incorporate it into hey, the sirens are going off, testing the tornado sirens. Why don't we just do 5 minutes of meditation? Or, I play a popcorn game with my adults in adolescence at times where it's just everybody's going through the alphabet, hopping around the room with their eyes closed. Why can't we just do that, even if it is incorporating it into something like that? So I'm almost going to steal that and apply that every time I hear on Tuesdays at 10 o'clock, which is the end of my process group in the morning. So why not? Why not start incorporating it in having that be a part of that daily conversation even?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is a wonderful place to end. I feel hopeful. I feel educated. Thank you to all the panelists for taking the time out to share your knowledge, your experience, your expertise with us. Greatly appreciate it. Please take time to stop by all the tables outside, gather resources, connect. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate you.